Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel for a brand new mystery with Molly. If you are new around here, if you have never seen my face on your screen before, then hi, my name is Molly and I post true crime videos like this every single week. So if you think that is something that you might want to stick around for, then please do subscribe and don't forget to switch on the little notification bell so that YouTube will let you know whenever I post a new video. This week we are going to be talking about the solved case of the Soham Murders, the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, who were two best friends. If you are also from the UK, then you may have heard of this case. It was huge news at the time, and it's a case that really shocked the whole nation. When Holly and Jessica just suddenly disappeared one day, an extensive police investigation was set up to try and find them and work out exactly what happened. Eventually, two people came under suspicion, and surprisingly, these two people actually kind of implicated themselves. Their behaviour was just very strange, and so the police started thinking that maybe they were involved in this crime. So for this case, we are going back nearly 2 decades to the year 2002 in Soham, which is a small and quiet town in East Cambridgeshire in England. So let's start this case by talking a bit more about who Holly and Jessica were, starting with Holly. 10-year-old Holly Marie Wells was born on the 4th of October 1991. She was the youngest of 2 children. She had an older brother named Oliver who was 2 years older than her. Her parents were called Kevin and Nicola, and the Wells were a very close-knit family of 4. Holly's father, Kevin, described his daughter as being a very bright and bubbly and busy young girl. She had a lot of stuff going on for someone that was just 10 years old. So for example, Holly was a member of a lot of different clubs in the area, one of which was Brownies, which was a club that I used to attend actually. Did anyone else go to Brownies when they were younger? Holly loved music. Her favourite band was S Club Juniors, and she herself really enjoyed singing and also playing the cornet. She enjoyed sports and she liked to write stories. That was one of her favourite things to do in school. She loved creative writing and she loved homework actually. She never complained about having to do homework, and her parents said that they never had to assist her with it either. Holly just got on with it herself, and then when she finished she would show her parents what she had done. She was a very smart and sensible young girl, and Holly's bestest friend was Jessica Chapman. The two of them met at nursery school when they were just 4 years old, and from that point on they were pretty much inseparable. They just clicked instantly and they became such good friends. In fact, they were described as being almost like sisters. They were incredibly close. They loved spending time together, and they only lived about 5 minutes away from each other in Soham. Jessica Amy Chapman was also 10 years old, and she was about a month older than Holly. She was born on the 1st of September 1991. Jessica's parents were called Leslie and Sharon Chapman, and they had 3 children in total, 3 daughters. Their oldest was Rebecca, then Alison, and then Jessica. She was the youngest. Jessica was a very chatty young girl. She was bubbly, she was lively, she was very popular, she had several friends. She also liked listening to music. Her favourite bands were Steps and S Club Juniors. She was intelligent and very sporty. She loved football and swimming, and back in the early 2000s she was described as being like a tomboy, whereas her best friend Holly liked to dress up and wear pretty dresses and play around with makeup. Jessica was the opposite. She preferred to wear tracksuits and joggers and t-shirts and stuff. But their difference in fashion choice was one of the only differences between the two girls. I think apart from that, they were very similar, and they had such a close bond. In the summer of 2002, Jessica and her family actually went on holiday to Menorca. They were there for about 2 weeks and they had a really nice time. And when they returned to their home in Soham in early August of 2002, Jessica was so excited to see her best friend Holly again. Obviously, they hadn't seen each other in a couple of weeks, and Jessica was really looking forward to telling Holly all about her holiday. And so, on the afternoon of Sunday the 4th of August 2002, Jessica went to Holly's house. Holly lived on a road called Red House Gardens in Soham. It was a little like cul-de-sac. And that day, the 4th of August, Holly's parents, Kevin and Nicola, were actually having a barbecue. They had invited around a couple of their friends to join them for this barbecue, and Holly invited Jessica round. And the girls had a really nice afternoon. They actually decided to dress up and wear the same outfits. You see, both of the girls were huge Manchester United fans. That was their favourite football team, and so they decided to both match and wear the Manchester United football kit. And because they were matching, Holly's mum Nicola decided to take a picture of the two girls. But little did she know at the time, this picture would soon become infamous, because it turns out that this would be the last picture ever taken of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. Later that evening, shortly after 6 p.m, Holly and Jessica actually decided to leave Holly's house and go for a walk. It's believed that they intended to go and buy some sweets. However, they didn't actually inform Holly's parents that they were going. They just left the house, and so naturally Kevin and Nicola Wells assumed that the two girls were just upstairs playing in Holly's bedroom. But when they went upstairs to check on them around 8 to 8:30 p.m, they weren't there. There was no sign of the girls, and immediately the family were concerned, because obviously they had no idea where the girls were. The girls hadn't said that they were going out. They hadn't asked if they could go out. So Kevin and Nicola were instantly worried. And so Kevin and Holly's older brother Oliver decided to go out together on their bikes and just cycle around the area to see if they could find Holly and Jessica. But unfortunately, they had no luck, which only caused the family to panic even more. Nicola Wells phoned Jessica's parents, Leslie and Sharon Chapman, to see if maybe the girls had decided to go to Jessica's house. After all, it was only a 5-minute walk away. However, the Chapmans said that the girls were not there. They had no idea where they were. And so shortly after this, the two families decided that they needed to turn to the police for help, and they reported Holly and Jessica as missing. Of course, because the girls were just 10 years old, the police took this report very seriously, and officers were immediately dispatched to search for Holly and Jessica. Although it was difficult for them to search, because it was quite late that evening when the girls were reported as missing, and obviously as it got later and later, it only got darker and darker outside. And it was actually quite foggy that evening. There was a lot of fog in the air, which only made it harder to search. But they carried on searching anyway. They went to the homes of all of Holly and Jessica's friends to see if maybe the girls had gone there, maybe they'd gone for a sleepover or something, but they hadn't. They searched the streets, they searched fields, parks, they were shouting the girls' names, they were just looking for any trace of them, but there was nothing. The following morning, the search for the girls continued, and by this point, even more officers were assigned to the case, and less than 24 hours after the girls disappeared, the police made a public appeal in which they pleaded for anyone with any information to come forward. And as you would expect, this case was very quickly in the media spotlight. News of Holly and Jessica's disappearance spread very rapidly because, well, number one, they were two 10-year-old girls, and it was very out of their character to do something like this. As I said earlier, they were both sensible young girls. They would never go out and just not return home. But also, I think the fact that it happened in Soham as well, that really shocked people, because Soham was a small, quiet town. Nothing much really happened there, and crime rates were low. So two 10-year-old girls going missing from the Soham area was so unusual. So everyone was talking about this case. It was all over the news, and the police released this picture to the public, the last picture that was ever taken of the girls. They were really hoping that it would jog people's memories. Perhaps someone would remember having seen two young girls in red Man United kits that evening, and they would come forward. As a result of the media attention that this case received, hundreds and hundreds of people volunteered their time to help search for Holly and Jessica. They joined the police whilst they searched local fields and canals, meadows, woodlands. One of the theories in the very beginning of the investigation was that maybe the girls had just gotten lost somewhere. Maybe they wandered off into the local woods or something and they just couldn't find their way back home. I think everyone was hoping that that would be the case, that they were just lost and that it would only be a matter of time before the police found them. But as time went on, that theory sadly seemed less and less likely. Now, it was quickly established that Jessica actually had a mobile phone on her at the time that she went missing. She had this little Nokia phone that she took with her everywhere. Her parents gave it to her for that reason, so that she could take it anywhere she went and they could contact her at any time. And shortly after she disappeared, her mother Sharon tried to ring Jessica's phone, but Jessica didn't pick up. In fact, the phone went straight to voicemail, indicating that it had been switched off. So the police tried to trace her phone. They tried to pinpoint where it was through the signal, but unfortunately nothing significant really came of this. All they could determine was that the phone was last detected in the Soham area. It couldn't detect exactly where in Soham the phone was, so this was a bit useless to the police. Soon, more than 500 police officers were assigned to this case, many of which had come from different police forces. They were all put on this one case because it was such a high priority. They needed as much manpower as possible in this investigation. They needed as many people as possible out there looking for the girls. But despite everything, despite the hours and hours and hours put into this case, despite the hundreds of people out searching, despite the huge amount of media coverage this case was receiving, after a couple of days, they still had nothing. The police were no closer to finding Holly and Jessica. In a desperate bid for answers, a few days into the search, Holly's parents, Kevin and Nicola Wells, actually reached out to a psychic, and this psychic's name was Dennis Mackenzie. Kevin and Nicola didn't even believe in that kind of thing prior to this. They didn't believe in psychic abilities, but you can only imagine how much pain they were in. They just wanted to know what had happened to their daughter and her best friend. So they wanted to see if Dennis could help them, if he could provide them with some information. And Dennis actually told Kevin and Nicola that he believed the girls were sadly no longer alive. They had passed away. 6 days after the girls were last seen, the police filmed a reconstruction of their last known movements. They had two girls around a similar age as Holly and Jessica dress in Manchester United kits and walk along the same route that Holly and Jessica walked just before they disappeared. And then this reconstruction was released to the public and the media. Again, they were hoping that it would jog some people's memories. Hopefully people would remember whether or not they saw the girls that day. And the police were able to determine Holly and Jessica's steps that evening, firstly from using CCTV footage from around the local area, and also from reported sightings of the girls that they had already received. So let's talk about that. Let's talk about the girls' last steps before they went missing. So as we know, the girls left Holly's house on Red House Gardens shortly after 6 p.m. that evening. They exited Holly's Road and started walking along another road called Tanner's Lane. And then at the end of Tanner's Lane, it was determined that they turned right onto Sand Street, where they were reportedly seen by a couple, a husband and his wife, as they were driving along Sand Street. And the husband actually pointed the girls out to his wife, and he made a comment like, "Oh look, there's two mini Beckhams over there," because I believe Beckham was the name on the back of their Man U tops, like David Beckham. It was determined that the girls then began walking in the direction of the local sports centre called Ross Piers Sports Centre. At 6:13 p.m, the girls were spotted on a CCTV camera walking across the sports centre's car park, and they were seen by a couple of people in the car park who were just leaving the sports centre. Following this, the girls went inside the sports centre. They were let in by the duty manager and they went straight to the vending machine. canteen, because this was actually where they used to get their sweets. So they got their sweets, they left the building, and they were seen by another employee of the sports centre just walking along together. Their arms were linked and they seemed fine, they seemed happy. And then the police also received information from another witness, a man named Ian Huntley, and he said that he believed he may have been the last person to see Holly and Jessica before they disappeared. Ian Huntley worked as a caretaker at the local college, Soham Village College, which was actually very close to Holly and Jessica's primary school, St Andrew's Primary School. And he lived on the college grounds. He lived in a house 5 College Close with his girlfriend. Her name was Maxine Carr. And Maxine actually used to work at St Andrew's Primary School. She was a teaching assistant there, so she knew Holly and Jessica very well. In fact, Holly and Jessica loved Miss Carr. However, she left the school just before the end of the summer holidays in 2002. Maxine was hoping to stay at St Andrew's School, but I believe her position was just temporary and she wasn't offered a permanent one, so she was quite disappointed about that. And so were the girls, Holly and Jessica. They were sad that she wasn't going to be their teacher anymore. But anyway, back to Maxine's boyfriend, Ian Huntley. So as I said, he got in contact with the police and he said that he had seen the girls on the evening that they disappeared. Ian said that that evening he was out by the front of his house with his dog, and he was just giving his dog a bit of a wash because she was all muddy. And he said that whilst he was doing this, Holly and Jessica actually walked along. They walked past his house and they started chatting to him. Ian said that the girls asked how his girlfriend, Miss Carr, was, and he responded saying that she wasn't feeling too great because she hadn't secured the permanent teaching position at the primary school. And the girls then asked if he could pass on to Miss Carr that they were really sorry about that. And then following this, Ian said that the girls carried on walking, and that was the last time he saw them, the last time it seemed anyone saw them. 11 days after the girls were last seen, on the 15th of August, there was still nothing, no sign of the girls. The police still had no clue where they were or what happened to them. And so Sky News actually decided to film a television segment where they retraced the girls' last known steps. And as part of this segment, they spoke to Ian Huntley, as he was the last person to see them, and he talked them through his account.
How do we know they were here at 6:15? Well, we have an eyewitness. Ian Huntley here is a familiar figure. Evening, Ian. You're the school caretaker. The girls, Jessica and Holly, would know you, and they saw you on the front doorstep. What went on?
Well, I don't know the girls. I was stood on the front doorstep grooming my dog down. She'd run away and come back a bit of a mess. They just came across and asked how Miss Carr was, as she used to teach them at St Andrews. I just said she weren't very good, as she hadn't got the job. And they just says, please tell her that we're very sorry. And off the walked in the direction of the library over there.
And Ian's girlfriend, Maxine Carr, also did her own interview with Sky News, in which she talked about the girls and how she knew them from St Andrew's Primary School.
This is something I'll probably keep for the rest of my life, I think. It's what Holly gave me on the last day of term. She was very, very upset because I didn't get my job, and that's the kind of girl she was. She was just lovely, really lovely.
That's really very sweet, isn't it?
Yeah.
But it was after the Sky News crew ended this interview with Maxine, the one you would have just seen, and they went to a commercial break, that a couple of the producers pointed something out to Jeremy Thompson, the man who interviewed Maxine. They pointed out the fact that in this interview, Maxine had spoken about Holly and Jessica in the past tense. She said they were and they was, and she was, not they are or she is. I'll play the clips again for you.
They was very close to all their family. She was very, very upset because I didn't get my job, and that's the kind of girl she was. And that's the kind of girl she was.
And of course this seems strange because at this point the girls were still missing. They hadn't been found yet, so no one knew if they were dead or alive. So why was Maxine referring to them as if they were no longer here? Why was she saying they were really kind and they were so close to their families? It just seemed really odd and suspicious, but Maxine wasn't the only one who ended up drawing suspicion, her boyfriend, Ian Huntley, did too. And the reason for this was because Ian seemed to be very, very interested in Holly and Jessica's case, almost too interested. He liked to involve himself in it a lot. The Sky News interview wasn't actually the only one he did. He did several interviews with many different news stations talking about his last conversation with Holly and Jessica as the last person to see them both before they disappeared. And he was very much involved in the searches for Holly and Jessica. As I said earlier, the police had hundreds of people come forward offering to volunteer their time to help look for the girls, and Ian Huntley was one of them. He was always there at the searches. He seemed very keen to help, which of course at the time didn't seem too suspicious because so many other people were keen to help as well. However, the police knew to keep an eye out for people who were too involved, who seemed to be a bit too engrossed in the case, a bit too obsessed, and that was Ian Huntley. The police know that in missing persons cases or murder cases, the person who is responsible, the perpetrator, is often one of the people who join in the searches for their victim or victims. One case that immediately springs to mind where this kind of thing has happened is the Ebony Simpson case, which I covered last year. She was just 9 years old when she was abducted and murdered by paedophile Andrew Garfor. When Ebony went missing, there was a huge search for her. Just like with this case, so many people in the local community came together to try and find her, and one of the people that joined the search was her killer, Andrew Garfor. He joined in the search for Ebony even though he knew that she wouldn't be found alive. He knew that she was dead, but he joined in the search because he was hoping that that way he would avoid suspicion. If he looked like he wanted to help, hopefully no one would suspect him as being the killer. And this kind of thing has happened in several other cases. The perpetrator volunteers because they want to look like they are just concerned members of the community to avoid suspicion. But as I said, people that do this a little too much, like to be a little too involved in the case, usually end up doing the opposite. They end up drawing suspicion to themselves. And that was the case, or starting to be the case, with Ian Huntley. He was getting really involved in the searches for Holly and Jessica. He was doing so many TV interviews, and it just seemed very strange. He just seemed so obsessed with the case, like he wanted to know everything that the police knew. So naturally, the police did start to think that his behaviour was a bit unusual, and his girlfriend Maxine's behaviour too. The fact that in her interview with Sky News, she was referring to the girls in the past tense. Both Ian and Maxine just started to raise the police's eyebrows. They started to think, were these two people possibly involved in this case, involved with whatever had happened to Holly and Jessica? And the detectives' suspicions just grew enormously when shortly after one of Ian Huntley's interviews aired on the TV, a woman got in contact with the police. This woman was from a town called Grimsby, which is located in North Lincolnshire in England. It's a couple of hours away from Soham, and it's where Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr used to live. They used to live in Grimsby before they moved to Soham. And this woman from Grimsby that contacted the police investigating this case said that she had literally just seen Ian Huntley's face on the news, and she thought the police should know that whilst he was living in Grimsby, he was in court for rape. Ian Huntley, the man who claimed he was the last person to see Holly and Jessica before they went missing, had previously been charged with rape. In fact, it turns out that Ian Huntley had a lengthy history of sexual assault. He had many allegations of rape against him, several of which involved underage girls, children. 28-year-old Ian Huntley was born on the 31st of January 1974 in Grimsby in Lincolnshire. His parents were Kevin and Linda Huntley, and Ian was one of 2 children. He had a younger brother named Wayne. Sources state that as a young child, Ian was always a bit of a mummy's boy. He was very attached to his mother, and he was always a little bit nervous around his father. I think his father was quite a strict man. And Ian did not have an easy time in school. He was bullied quite a lot throughout his time at primary school and secondary school. He never really had many friends. He was a bit of a loner, and when he eventually left school around 1990, he went straight into work rather than going to college. I think he did odd jobs here and there, and in the year 1994, 20-year-old Ian Huntley began a relationship with a woman named Claire Evans, who was 18. They met whilst they were both working at the same factory, and they immediately hit it off. They started dating, and very shortly after they started seeing each other, they actually got married. However, it wasn't long at all until Claire started to regret getting married to Ian Huntley, because she soon discovered that he had a temper. He could get very, very angry and abusive, physically abusive towards her. In fact, Claire even said that there were a couple of occasions where Ian would strangle her. He would put his hands around her neck, and she was so scared of him. She thought he was going to kill her. I also read on one source that Claire was pregnant at one point. However, she suffered a miscarriage, and this was caused by Ian Huntley from where he had beaten her. So their relationship did not last long at all. Claire soon left him, and she actually started dating Ian's younger brother Wayne instead, and she wanted to marry Wayne. She really loved him, but Ian Huntley would not let this happen. He just outright refused to divorce Claire so that she couldn't marry Wayne. In the end, it wasn't until years after they split in 1999 when the divorce finally happened. But despite him refusing to divorce Claire all that time, that didn't stop him from seeing other women, or girls I should say. He started getting into relationships with numerous young girls, the majority of whom were under the age of consent, under the age of 16, and he was obviously a fully grown adult man by this point. He was in his 20s. So this was illegal. These girls legally could not give their consent, and in 1998, he actually got a 15-year-old girl pregnant. This girl was called Katie Bryan, and she suffered so much abuse at the hands of Ian Huntley. He was mentally and emotionally and physically abusive towards her, and of course sexually abusive too. And even when she became pregnant with his child, the abuse didn't stop. It carried on. He would beat her. He even pushed her down the stairs on one occasion. And it was then when Katie knew that she had to get out, she had to get away from Ian Huntley, not just for her own safety, but also for the safety of the baby that she was carrying. And so she left him. Katie went back home with her mum, and eventually she gave birth to a daughter who she named Samantha. And thankfully, Ian never had anything to do with his child. The same year that his daughter Samantha was born, Ian Huntley was charged with burglary, and also he was arrested and charged with the rape of an 18-year-old girl. He did go to court for these charges. However, unfortunately, due to a lack of evidence, the cases were dropped. He wasn't convicted. But honestly, there are so many allegations of sexual assault and rape against him. I read about so many different ones online whilst I was researching this case. One girl that he allegedly raped was as young as 11 years old. But very frustratingly, he was never actually convicted of any of these, mainly due to the fact that there either just wasn't enough evidence for him to go to trial, or the girls themselves didn't actually want to press charges. A lot of them claimed that they didn't have sex with Ian, he didn't rape them. I imagine they were probably too scared to tell the truth, and he probably threatened them or he manipulated them. He was a very manipulative man, and a lot of his victims were so young, and he probably convinced them that they were in a relationship and so they should lie to the police so that he wouldn't be arrested. But it's believed that Ian Huntley may have sexually assaulted and raped around 60 women in his lifetime, and he had a reputation of being a sexual predator and a paedophile. But he would also move around a lot. Every time there would be allegations of rape against him in one area, he would simply move to another area, and then when these same allegations began to surface there, he would move again. In early 1999, Ian Huntley met Maxine Carr and they began dating. At this point he would have been around 25 years old and she was 22, so that makes a change. Normally he was interested in girls that were much younger. But anyway, they started seeing each other, and after just a month of dating, they actually moved in together. And Maxine fell head over heels for Ian Huntley. In the beginning of their relationship, she thought that he was this sweet, charming man and she adored him. About a year into their relationship, the two of them relocated to Scunthorpe, which is a town in North Lincolnshire. It's about a 40-minute drive away from Grimsby, which is where they were living prior to this. And the reason they moved was because Ian was accused of yet another rape attack in Grimsby, in the area where they were living at the time. So he moved them to get away from that. But anyway, as their relationship continued, Huntley started to abuse Maxine, just like he had done with the other women and girls that he had had relationships with before. He was both physically and emotionally abusive, and he was very controlling. So much so that Maxine wasn't even allowed to have people around their house when Ian wasn't there. One time she had invited their neighbour around for a cup of coffee and a chat, and literally as soon as her neighbour finished their drink, Maxine picked it straight up. She picked up the cup, she went to the sink, she washed it, dried it and put it back in the cupboard exactly where it was before. And she told her neighbour that she did it because her boyfriend Ian didn't like it when people were around the house if he wasn't there. He wouldn't allow Maxine to have any visitors, so she had to get rid of the evidence that someone had been there before he got home. On another occasion, this same neighbour actually witnessed Ian being violent towards Maxine. She could see into their kitchen from a window in her house, and one day she saw Maxine literally crouching down in the corner of the room. Her hands were covering her head and Ian was just standing over her and he was hitting her and screaming and shouting at her. So he was really vile towards Maxine, but despite the abuse, she stayed with him. She may have been too terrified to leave him, but also she did genuinely love this man. People said that she worshipped the ground that he walked on, so she didn't want to leave him. He was very manipulative, as I said earlier. In the year 2001, the couple decided to up and move again. This time they moved to Soham in Cambridgeshire. They moved to the Soham area just the year before this case occurred. When they moved to Soham, Maxine got a job as a classroom assistant in the local primary school, St Andrews, the same school that Holly and Jessica attended. And as we know, Ian Huntley got a job working as the school caretaker at the local college, and he was allowed to live in a house on the college grounds. And I think this is probably one of the most insane parts of this whole case, the fact that Ian Huntley, a man who had been to court on charges of rape and had several allegations of rape and sexual assault and also indecent exposure against him. He had also been accused of indecent exposure according to some reports. He was able to get a job working as a school caretaker, working amongst underage girls, children, who, as we know, he had a sexual interest in, and yet he was still able to get a job in a school. It's unbelievable. But we'll go over all of that a little later on in the video. But now that we know a bit more about Ian Huntley and the kind of disgusting man that he was, let's go back to where we left off with the case. As we discussed, Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr aroused suspicion after Maxine Maxine's interview with Sky News when she referred to Holly and Jessica in the past tense, and just Ian's behaviour in general was suspicious. He wanted to do so many interviews about the fact that he was supposedly the last person to see the girls on the day that they went missing. He was heavily involved in the search for them. He seemed to be obsessed with this case, and the police's concerns only grew enormously, in fact, when after Ian's interviews aired on TV, a woman from his hometown Grimsby came forward and said that he had previously been in court for rape. So it was after all of this that the police were just like, okay, we seriously need to look into this guy. We need to determine whether he could have been responsible for Holly and Jessica's disappearance, since he himself said that he was the last person to see the girls. And so 12 days after the girls were last seen, on the 16th of August 2002, Ian Huntley and Maxine Carr were brought in to be questioned by detectives. However, they weren't questioned for too long because Ian had an alibi for the time that the girls went missing, and this alibi was provided by his girlfriend Maxine. Maxine told the police that she was in their house when Holly and Jessica were chatting to Ian outside. She heard them chatting and then she heard the girls walk off, and then she said that she and Ian were just at home together for the rest of the evening. They were both home all night, and at that point the police had no evidence to prove otherwise to indicate that Maxine was lying, and so they were both released after about 7 hours of questioning. However, it would not be long until evidence was found. As all of this was going on, as the pair were being questioned, and even after they were released, the police were conducting searches of Ian and Maxine's home on the Soham College grounds, and they were just searching the college in general because he was the caretaker there. So if he was the one who abducted and possibly even killed the girls, perhaps he may have been hiding evidence, or he disposed of evidence somewhere on the college grounds. And on the 17th of August 2002, the police found something in the rubbish bins at the college. They found what looked like some burnt clothing that had previously been set on fire. The clothing they found was some shoes, some underwear, tracksuit bottoms, and 2 football shirts, 2 Manchester United football shirts. These were the shirts that Holly and Jessica had been wearing on the day that they were last seen alive. And 13 days after they disappeared, they were found just discarded in the bins at the college where the now main suspect, Ian Huntley, worked. So this clothing was collected as evidence and it was all examined by a forensic scientist, and on the clothing the scientists actually found a total of 5 human head hairs, and when tested it was found that these hairs were a match to Ian Huntley. His hair was found on the girls' clothing. So it was following this discovery that 28-year-old Ian Huntley and his girlfriend, 25-year-old Maxine Carr, were arrested. And despite the fact that the girls still hadn't been found, they were arrested on suspicion of abduction and murder. And as soon as Maxine was arrested and she was interviewed again, she admitted to the police that she hadn't been truthful to them. She said that when she was previously interviewed, she had lied. She told them that on the night that the girls disappeared, Ian was with her all night in their home, but she was now saying that that wasn't true. She was actually in Grimsby that night. I believe she was visiting her mother in Grimsby. She wasn't even in Soham, and that was confirmed to have actually been true. Maxine was nowhere near the area that night, but despite that, she had lied for Ian. She had provided him with a false alibi. In Ian's questioning, he denied everything. He said he had nothing to do with whatever had happened to the girls. He did not abduct them and he didn't kill them. However, later that same day, the 17th of August, the almost 2-week extensive search for Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman finally came to an end when their bodies were found. That afternoon, their bodies were discovered by a member of the public in a ditch next to an RAF base in Lakenheath, which is a village in Suffolk, and it's just under 15 miles away from Soham. The girls were laying side by side in the ditch and they were pretty badly decomposed when they were found, and their bodies were actually burnt. The perpetrator had clearly tried to set their bodies on fire to probably destroy any evidence, coincidentally just like the clothing that was found in the college bins. Now, due to the state of decomposition, it was a struggle for the coroner to determine exactly how the girls had been killed, but according to sources it was eventually concluded that their cause of death was likely to have been from asphyxiation, but they couldn't tell how this had been done, so they couldn't determine whether the girls had been strangled or suffocated, etc. And I also don't believe they could tell whether the girls had been sexually assaulted, but it's believed that whether they were or not, this crime was sexually motivated, because we know Ian Huntley was a paedophile. But after the bodies were found, a forensic team was obviously sent to the scene to see if they could find any other evidence, and they did. Near their bodies, they found some material from one of the tracksuit bottoms that the girls were wearing, and they also found an item of jewellery, which again one of the girls was wearing the day that they went missing. Following this, a forensic botanist named Patricia Wiltshire was called in, and a botanist is basically an expert in plants. They are plant scientists, and they called Patricia in to look at the scene and take samples because they wanted her help to, I think, firstly determine how long the girls had been there, whether they had been in the ditch since they went missing or if their bodies had recently been put there. And also they wanted Patricia's help in determining where the killer had entered the ditch with the bodies. So it was concluded that the girls had been there in the ditch pretty much since their disappearance, or around then. They'd been there for a while. So they were murdered pretty soon after they were last seen. And Patricia discovered some nettles near the ditch that had previously been stepped on and had gone through corrective growth. So she could tell that this was the spot where the killer got into the ditch. This was their entrance. And when the police searched this spot, this path that the killer used, they actually discovered a human head hair, which was a match to Jessica's hair. And when Patricia examined the girls' clothing that was found in the bins at Soham College, she was able to determine that when the girls' bodies were placed in the ditch, they were actually fully clothed. So they were put in the ditch and then the killer removed their clothing and dumped it in the college bins. And Patricia could tell this because on their clothing she found evidence and traces of vegetation from the ditch. Meanwhile, as these searches of the ditch were happening, Ian Huntley's house was still being searched by a forensic team, and so was his car, because it was theorised that he used his car to transport the bodies to the ditch in Lakenheath. Now, it was very obvious when the police searched the house that Ian Huntley had recently cleaned it, deep cleaned it, because there was a very, very strong smell of bleach and cleaning products in the air. So he had very clearly been trying to get rid of any forensic evidence, but despite his efforts, scientists still found traces of the girls' clothing in the house. They found fibres from the clothing that the girls were wearing on the day that they disappeared in many different rooms of the house. They picked up fibres downstairs, upstairs, and in the bathroom. So that proved that the girls' clothing had been inside his house at some point. Unfortunately, forensics didn't find any traces of Holly and Jessica's DNA in his home, so like they didn't find any fingerprints or blood or anything like that. And this was purely down to the fact that he had meticulously cleaned the property from top to bottom. The cleaning products he used would have wiped away any DNA evidence. As for his car, it was determined that he had also cleaned that. He cleaned the inside, the outside, and he'd even changed the tyres. But again, despite his efforts, they still found evidence on his car that linked him to the crime. I believe it was underneath his car, on and around the wheel arches, they found little chunks of soil. And when tested, it was discovered that this soil matched the same type of soil that was in the ditch where the girls' bodies were found. And there were also traces found on his car of the road surface that led to the area where the girls' bodies were dumped. So that showed that he had driven along that specific road. So there was now quite a substantial amount of evidence linking Ian Huntley to the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman, and so he was charged with the crime. However, whilst he was actually being held in custody, Ian started trying to claim that he was mentally ill. So mentally ill, in fact, that he wouldn't be able to go to court and stand trial because he was unstable. He began doing things like dribbling at the mouth when the police tried to speak to him and question him. He would make out that he couldn't communicate with them, he couldn't understand what was going on. He was restless and agitated, which he had never been like before. Like when he was first taken in for questioning before he was arrested, he was completely fine. He wasn't dribbling, he was speaking normally, he was able to answer questions. But conveniently, now that he had been arrested and charged and the evidence was just piling up against him, he was suddenly the opposite. It seemed like he was pretending to be mentally ill so that hopefully it was found that he couldn't go to trial, because if he was unstable, then he couldn't have been held responsible for his actions and therefore his sentence would not be as harsh. But of course, no one was buying it. He was not mentally ill. This was all just an act. He was examined by a psychiatrist and they confirmed that he was fine. He was mentally fit enough to know exactly what he was doing, and therefore he was able to stand trial if it came to that. Anyway, as I said, he was charged with both murders, and his girlfriend, Maxine Carr, was charged with perverting the course of justice and assisting an offender. She couldn't be charged with murder because, as we discussed earlier, it was proven that she wasn't in Soham on the night that the girls went missing and were murdered. She was in Grimsby. But she had previously provided Ian with a fake alibi, so that was the perverting the course of justice charge, and she was charged with assisting an offender because the police believed that she helped Ian clean up the scene. She helped him clean their house to get rid of any evidence. But despite the evidence against them, both Ian and Maxine decided to plead not guilty to their charges. So that meant that there had to be a trial. However, about a month before their trial began, Ian Huntley decided to change his story about what happened on the day that the girls went missing, the 4th of August 2002. So as we know, up until this point, throughout the whole investigation, Ian stuck to the same story. He said that he saw Holly and Jessica the afternoon that they disappeared. He chatted to them outside of his house whilst he was grooming down his dog, and then they left, and when he last saw them, they were alive. He said he had absolutely nothing to do with their deaths, and he stuck by that until just the month before his trial, when he decided to change his version of events. Ian Huntley's new story was that on that fateful day, he was outside of his property grooming his dog when Holly and Jessica walked past, and he noticed that Holly was having a nosebleed, and so he invited the two girls into his house so that he could help Holly with her nosebleed and she could kind of clean herself up. However, he said that whilst they were all in the bathroom, Holly accidentally fell into the bathtub, which was apparently filled with water, and she drowned. His story was that this fit, healthy 10-year-old just accidentally drowned in the bath. And he said that when this happened, Holly's best friend Jessica started getting upset and she was screaming and shouting. And so he tried to calm her down and stop her from screaming by putting his hand over her mouth. And he said that following this, Jessica died too. He said he accidentally killed Jessica by suffocating her, and then he said that after both the girls were dead, he just panicked, and instead of calling an ambulance or the police, he decided to get rid of their bodies, and so he drove them to that ditch in Lakenheath. So Ian was now admitting that he was responsible for the girls' deaths. They did die in his house, but it was just an accident. And so when it came to his trial, Ian's defence team were going to try and go down the route of manslaughter. They wanted the jury to convict him of manslaughter rather than murder. But the police and the prosecution, of course, did not believe this was the case at all. They did not think that this was just an accident. And so during the trial, they presented the jury with what they believed happened. The prosecution discussed how they believed that just before the girls were abducted by Ian, he had spoken to his girlfriend Maxine Carr on the phone, and they had argued. They argued because he accused her of being unfaithful to him, of cheating on him with another man, I believe while she was in Grimsby, and I don't know if that's true or not, but that's what Ian thought. So the prosecution said that after he got off the phone to Maxine, he was frustrated, he was so angry, and then just moments after this, he happened to see Holly and Jessica walking past his house after they had just purchased some sweets from the nearby sports centre, and he decided that he was going to take his anger out on them. He was going to kill them. So he somehow lured them into his house. It's been theorised that he may have told them that Miss Carr was in there in the house and they could come in and talk to her if they wanted, which obviously they would have loved to have done because Holly and Jessica loved Maxine. She was one of their favourite teachers at St Andrews. So they went inside, and following this, he murdered both of them. It's believed that the girls were probably dead by 6:45 that evening because it was discovered that Jessica's mobile phone, her Nokia, was switched off at 6:46 p.m. and Ian Huntley would have been the one to do this. He switched off Jessica's phone, which was never found actually. He got rid of it after the murder and the police never found it. Obviously, as I mentioned earlier, we don't know exactly how Ian murdered the girls. All we know is that they died as a result of asphyxiation, and we also don't know if they were sexually assaulted. But again, given Ian Huntley's history of allegations of rape and sexual assault of underage girls, it is believed that this crime was sexually motivated. Whether he actually assaulted them or not is unknown. And then we know what happened after he killed them. He put their bodies in his car, he drove them to Lakenheath, he put them in the ditch, and then he removed their clothing and disposed of it in the bins at Soham College. He attempted to burn the clothing and their bodies, and it's stated on a couple of sources that he did this a few days after the murders. A couple of days later, he returned to the ditch and tried to set their bodies on fire to destroy any traces of his DNA. And when the girls were reported as missing, he acted like any other concerned member of the community. He was getting heavily involved in the searches for the girls. He told the police that he was the last person to see them, and I don't know why he did that actually, because that was really how he gave himself away. He could have just stayed quiet, but he didn't. He chose to tell the police that he saw Holly and Jessica that evening. Some people speculate that the reason he did that was because he was worried that maybe one of his neighbours or a member of the public saw him with the girls outside of his house that day, and he was concerned that they would go to the police and say, look, I saw the girls with this guy. So if he went to the police himself and said that he had seen the girls and spoken to them before they went missing, that would kind of cover his back, if that makes sense. As we've discussed, he did various interviews with different TV stations about his encounter with the girls, and one interview that really stood out to me was one where he was talking about the searches for Holly and Jessica, and he said that the police had basically told the local community to be on the lookout for anyone you know displaying any strange behaviour. They said, think about your neighbours, think about your friends, just anyone you know that could have possibly been capable of abducting the girls. And Ian was talking about all of that in this interview, interview, and he also said, quote, "It's very frustrating knowing that we have people that way inclined amongst us and us not knowing who they are." By that way inclined, he means paedophiles. He's literally talking about how it's frustrating knowing that there are potential paedophiles around and no one knows who they are. But he is literally the person that he is describing. He is a paedophile. He's a sexual predator and he knows he is. So the fact that he said that in an interview is just so chilling. But anyway, back to what happened in court. So during the trial, Maxine Carr once again admitted that she had given Ian Huntley a false alibi, but she claimed that she had absolutely no idea that Huntley had killed the girls. She said that the reason she gave him an alibi was because he asked her to. She said that Ian told her that he was innocent. He had nothing to do with Holly and Jessica's disappearance, but he was worried that the police would think otherwise if they found out about his history, about his previous allegations of rape, and so she agreed to lie for him. It wasn't until they were arrested and Maxine was actually shown evidence by the police that proved Ian was the killer that she stopped covering for him. I also read on one source that Maxine said the only reason she referred to the girls in the past tense in her Sky News interview was because she had obviously worked with the girls in the past. She used to be their teaching assistant, but she claimed that she had absolutely no idea that the girls were dead when that interview was filmed. And I believe she admitted that she did help Ian clean their house after the girls disappeared, but not because she knew that a double murder had occurred there. She said that she just liked the house to be very clean and tidy anyway, so she cleaned often. During the trial, the prosecution went through all of the forensic evidence that linked Huntley to the crime, the evidence which we've obviously already discussed, like his hairs on the girls' clothing, the fibres found in his house, the soil found on his car which matched the soil in the ditch. There was a lot of evidence against him. And at the end of the trial, the jury went off to deliberate and ultimately they agreed with the prosecution. On the 17th of December 2003, about a year and 4 months after the crime, the jury found Ian Huntley guilty of the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman by a majority verdict, and he was given 2 life sentences. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with the recommendation that he should serve at least 40 years in prison. Maxine Carr, on the other hand, was found guilty of one of her charges but not of the other. The jury found her guilty of perverting the course of justice, so for giving him a false alibi, but not guilty of assisting an offender because the jury believed that she genuinely didn't know that Ian had killed the girls. She only lied because she thought he was innocent. For her conviction, she was sentenced to 3.5 years in prison. However, she was released on the 14th of May 2004 after having served about 21 months in prison, and that included the time that she was held on remand before the trial. So in total, she served 60 months before the trial and 5 months after her conviction. Following her release, Maxine was actually given a brand new identity because there were concerns that her safety was at risk when she was let out of prison. So she was given a brand new name and lifelong anonymity. So she is just out there now living her life and no one has any idea where she is. Ian Huntley is of course still in prison to this day. He was originally sent to Wakefield prison, however he was later transferred to another prison after he was attacked by another inmate named Mark Hobson, who was a convicted spree killer. This happened in September of 2005. One day Mark Hobson scolded Ian Huntley with boiling water. A couple of years later, Ian would be moved to another prison. However, the attacks did not stop. Ian Huntley has been attacked a number of times in prison because of the nature of his crimes. Everyone in prison hates child killers, and rightly so. Now, I just want to quickly go back to Ian Huntley's daughter, Samantha. If you remember, he got a 15-year-old girl named Katie Bryan pregnant and she gave birth to a baby girl in 1998. As I said earlier, Ian never had anything to do with their daughter Samantha. In fact, Katie never intended to tell Samantha who her biological father was, or at least I don't think she was planning on telling Samantha his identity until she was a lot older, like until she was becoming an adult herself. However, unfortunately, Samantha found out the truth herself when she was at school one day. This was years after this case took place, by the way. I think Samantha was in her early teenage years at this point, and she was doing a project at school when she was looking at crime rates in her area, and when she did a Google search, up came an article about the case of the Soham murders, of the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. And Samantha saw a picture of her mother Katie and her as a young child, and the article was about how Samantha was Ian Huntley's daughter, and that was how she found out. That was how she found out who her real father was. Well, a couple of years after this, when Samantha was older, she actually decided to make contact with her real father, with Ian, whilst he was in prison. Samantha has actually done an interview about this where she goes into more detail, so if you would like to watch that, I will leave it linked in the description. But Samantha basically said in this interview that she reached out to Ian, she wrote to him in prison because she wanted answers. She wanted to see if he would open up to her about what he did, and if he was even sorry, if he showed remorse. And Ian did write back to Samantha. However, unfortunately, Samantha didn't really get what she was hoping for. He didn't show any guilt or remorse for his crimes. He actually said, when Samantha asked him to talk about the murders of Holly and Jessica, he said, quote, "I won't discuss the most horrendous day of my life." The most horrendous day of his life. The fact that he is referring to it like that is just vile and disgusting. However, in 2018, so just a couple of years ago, some tape recordings from Ian Huntley were somehow leaked and they were released by the Sun newspaper. The recordings were of Huntley in his prison cell, and they are of him apologising for the murders of Holly and Jessica. Unfortunately, I don't think I'll be able to play the recording for copyright reasons, but I will leave a link to it down below and I'll read you guys a quote from the tape now. He said, "I'm so terribly, terribly sorry for what I have done. The people of Soham took me into their community. They trusted me, they gave me a job and a home, and I betrayed that trust in the worst possible way. And I'm sorry for what I have done. Sorry for the pain I've caused to the families and friends of Holly and Jessica, for the pain I've caused my family and friends, and for the pain I've caused the community of Soham." He also spoke about Maxine Carr on the recordings, and he said, quote, "I wish her all the very best. I hope she is happy in what she is doing. I just hope she's found happiness," basically. And he also said that he has no intention of ever applying for parole. Obviously, he was sentenced to life imprisonment, but he was given a minimum term of 40 years. So he will come up for parole in 2042, but apparently he said he will not apply for it. He does not want to be released. He believes that he should die in prison for what he did. So let's hope he sticks to his word. Now, after Ian Huntley was convicted and sent to prison for the Soham murders, I think there was just a huge outpour of anger from the public when they learned that before he murdered Holly and Jessica, Ian had several allegations of sexual assault and rape against him, particularly with underage girls, and yet he was still able to get a job as a school caretaker when he moved to Soham. How the hell does that happen? How is a man who's been in court for rape still able to work in a school setting? People wanted answers, and so a public inquiry called the Bichard Inquiry inquiry was launched to look into this, look into child protection laws and measures. When Holly and Jessica actually went missing, obviously one of the first groups of people the Cambridgeshire police would have looked into was sex offenders. And yet Ian Huntley was not on their radar. Ian wasn't really a suspect in the case until that woman from Grimsby contacted the police saying, I think you should know that Huntley has previously been in court for rape. But Huntley wasn't on Cambridgeshire Police's list of sex offenders. And it was later found that the reason for this was because Humberside Police, so the police force that covers the town of Grimsby, the police force that would have dealt with the allegations of rape against Huntley whilst he was living there, it was found that they actually deleted his file as a serial sex attacker. They just deleted it off the system. And from what I can gather, the reason they did this was because Huntley was never actually convicted of anything. He did go to court for rape charges, but he was never convicted due to a lack of evidence and also a number of his victims not wanting to press charges. Mistakes were also made by Cambridgeshire Police because it was found that when Ian Huntley moved to Soham and he got the job as the school caretaker, they did not do a vetting check on Huntley. Had they done that, had they looked into his background and communicated with Humberside Police, they would have found out about the allegations of rape and his interest in underage girls. It was determined that there was a real lack of communication between police forces in this case. And when it comes to the safety of children and employing people who are going to work with children, there can't be that lack of communication. Those mistakes just cannot be made. 31 recommendations were made by the Bichard inquiry when it came to child protection. It was decided that there should be a system in place whereby anyone hoping to work with children should be vetted before they can do so. And so a national registration scheme was set up for those wishing to work with children or vulnerable people. It was also decided that more training should be given to head teachers and governors on how they should interview people applying for jobs in a school setting, ensuring that people are employed according to safeguarding rules, because it was actually found that the head teacher of Soham College, the head teacher that employed Ian Huntley, they actually didn't follow up and look into the references Ian Huntley had given when he applied for the school caretaker position. So the Bichard inquiry concluded that more training should be given to head teachers and governors. And another thing that the Bichard inquiry recommended was that there should be a clear code of practice for all police forces for record keeping and sharing data. And so there was an introduction of a national police intelligence system for England and Wales. Stricter measures were also put in place when it came to CRB checks, and social services were given more advice and guidance on when they should refer cases involving underage sex to the police. That's just a couple of recommendations that the Bichard inquiry made. As I've said, they made a total of 31, but the ones I've just shared with you are kind of the main ones, and hopefully these changes and tightening of laws and measures will continue to keep children safe and prevent something like this from ever happening again. In 2004, so just 2 years after Holly and Jessica were murdered, the house that they were murdered in, Ian's house on the college grounds, was demolished, and I believe it's just a patch of grass there now. In 2005, Holly Wells's father, Kevin Wells, released a book called Goodbye Dearest Holly, in which he talks about the day that the girls disappeared and the police investigation that was to follow. And then in 2012, he updated the book. He wrote an extra chapter in which he reflected on the 10 years that had passed since his daughter's murder. So if anyone is interested in reading Kevin's book, I will leave a link to it in the description box. A couple of other books have been made read about this case, a book was published by Dennis Mackenzie. If you remember, he was the psychic that Kevin and Nicola Wells reached out to in the days after the girls disappeared, and he told Kevin and Nicola that he believed the girls were dead, and unfortunately he was correct. He released a book called Being the Soham Psychic, The Man Who Talks to the Other Side. And another book that I actually started reading whilst I was researching this case was Beyond Evil, Inside the Twisted Mind of Ian Huntley by Nathan Yates. Again, I will leave those books linked down below in case any of you guys want to check them out. But that is it for this case. That is the heartbreaking case of the Soham murders, the murders of Holly Wells and Jessica Chapman. As always, I would love to hear what you guys think about this case in the comments, so please do let me know your thoughts and opinions, and feel free to let me know of any other cases that you would like to see me cover on this channel. Again, you can comment them down below, or alternatively I do have a case request form linked in the description box. Thank you all so much for watching. Please do give this video a thumbs up and subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you again next week for another mystery with Molly. Bye!